We're live. All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Angular Event Emitters and Observables. So this is the other side of the equation. So we've talked about how we get information into components. I liked yesterday, I think it was Sean that said like, oh, just kind of like a class is a template for an object. Component is a template for an HTML element. It's a good way to think of it. So what that looks like, we've got a big component that's made up of smaller components. That's made up of smaller components. And if we have data in one of them, we can pass that into other components. Kind of wrong. We can pass that into components, which can then in turn pass that on down into other components. You can do them more than once. So we call that data down. If you have some piece of state and you have children that need that, it only goes one direction. So you want your data up high and then pass that down wherever it needs to go. Data down. The way that these communicate back up is by firing events that their parents listen to, just like the DOM. And then those can fire other events, and then those can change the state. That is called actions up. Data down, actions up. So we get data down through a hierarchy by passing input props. We change things in our parents, state, fire functions, whatever, by emitting events. And then you can listen for those events just like you did with the DOM. Works almost the exact same way. So that is at input. Let's get the colors right. That is at input. This is at output. Questions so far? The canonical example that people like to use to illustrate this concept is a counter. So this is an app. This is a counter display. This is a counter increment. So these are components. One parent component that has two children. There's a count piece of state that lives here. And then you pass that state into the display component. And then you listen for an at increment. Sorry. That's the view way to do it. You listen for an increment event. Whenever that event happens, you call an increment function that changes the count. That count changes, that display input prop changes too. It goes in a circle. Call that one way data flow. Everything comes from exactly one place. That is the source of truth for a counter display, always. Incrementing the counter fires this increment function, listening for that event. That's how that happens. Increment function changes that value changes, this changes. We click that, and it just goes in a circle. One-way data flow. Let's see that in action.
So Kyle,
yes.
I'm sorry.
Hit me.
Even though that's a one-way data flow, that's still two-way binding, or no?
It is not two-way binding.
Okay.
I'll talk about two-way binding in a sec, but this is a distinctly different idea from two-way binding. It solves the exact same problem, though. This is an alternate way to have a child update a parent that isn't two-way binding. Two-way binding is kind of a bad idea. Angular is the only framework left that still allows you to do it, and even they don't really recommend it. It's in there. There's a pretty good chance you're going to see it in like Angular code, so that's why I have it in the curriculum. But it's mostly a bad idea. All right, so if I do npx at Angular CLI new counter demo ng. All right, so I'm going to scaffold up a new Angular app. And when this finishes installing, I'm going to make two components. The counter display and the counter increment. Don't follow along with this demo, but go ahead and get this scaffolded out because it's going to take a bit. I'm going to have you do this also. Just watch me the first time. But since this takes forever, go ahead and run your CLI generator. All right, so I go over the counter demo. Start up a server. And then I'm going to npx ng generate component counter display. I'm going to make a counter increment while I'm at it. So y'all have done enough Angular at this point that you can probably make a pretty reasonable guess at what happened there. I made those files. So I have like a counter display test, an HTML file, and style file, and a class file. And also, if I head over to the app module, it also imported those two components, added them to the declarations. If I go to the app component, HTML, delete all the boilerplate. Oops, did I delete something here? No. Let's see. Let's take a look at what I got so far. Cannot find name ng module. Oh, I I did delete something. Yeah. All right, cool. So I'm going to instantiate my app counter display and my app counter increment. Cool. So those two components are showing up. Over in app counter display, I am going to just put a hard-coded count there. And then over in my increment, I'm going to put a button. Cool. Nothing too crazy so far. Any questions about what I've done? Nice. Cool. So let's dress it up a little bit. So what if I make the count some kind of state that's in the app component? So I go app component TS. Over here, I make a count, and I initialize it to 1. Just to see that it worked, I'm going to make it 2 or 0. I just want to see something change on the screen. So then over here, I'm going to try to pass that in. So I'm going to say that the count property on app counter display should be one-way bound to the count property on app component. And if I go over to app counter display, get rid of some boilerplate, import input, the input decorator. I'll say, hey, there's such a thing as a count. By the way, it's a number. And optional. There we go. Oop, I need to invoke it. Too much Java lately. All right, cool. Now, over in counter display component HTML, instead of that hard-coded 1, how about I just make that the count? And it's 0. Hey! Cool. You can even make it so that, since I said that was an optional property, that if it is not passed in, I could do an ng if. Now, for whatever reason, I don't pass that in. The p tag doesn't even show up. I could also make it so that it's required. So it throws an error if I don't give it a count. I like that. Then, cool. All of that stuff that, like, very wine flicks. Questions about what I've done so far? Cool. So now the new stuff. Over on this button, I want to listen for that button to be clicked. As a reminder, we don't do add event listener. We don't do document.query selector. We don't do any of that stuff. all that's handled by the framework. We're working with a level of abstraction on top of that. It's still ultimately just the DOM. But all that, hang on just a sec. But all that DOM stuff over here is abstracted away. So that's the real DOM. Angular's right there. Our code is right here. So we're telling Angular how it should update the DOM. We don't really do it directly. So instead what we do is we say, hey, when this gets clicked, call this function. And then this says, hey, counter increment doesn't have a handle click function. Okay. Well, let's clean up some boilerplate. And let's give it a public handle click function. And we can log that this got called. All right, so if I click that increment button, I got called. So again, listen for the click event here. Call handle click whenever that happens. There's handle click. Logged something. Questions about that? Cool. For this event to escape this component, we need to set an output. And give it a name. So like, call it increment. And we're going to set that equal to a new event emitter. So it wants us to add output and add event emitter. Done.
Kyle, real fast, I'm so sorry to be late on the pony there. Is the event always going to be part of the same component where you have the element that's being affected? So the button will always be the same component where the event listener, listener is.
Exactly. Sorry. The event emitter is always going to be on the component that is emitting the event.
Okay.
So the mental model for this is that the component takes this data in and sends that event out. And the thing that causes this to happen, like this is just like add event listener. So you would be doing like add event listener here. Since a component is effectively a custom element, the output property is how you say that this component is firing an event, basically. Cool. So now what we want to do is instead of handle click, we want to say this.increment, which is this property up here, which we said was a new event emitter. we want to call emit. You can have more than one method that calls emit on this thing. Whenever that emit method gets called, this component fires an event. The way that we're going to listen for that event is to listen for that increment event. So over here, we say, whenever the increment event fires, then call my increment function, how about? Now it's mad at me because it says app component doesn't have an increment method. So if we add one, we could say, hey, whenever this event happens, this dot count should go up by 1. And with that, we've gone full circle. We initialized some state here. We passed it into the display. We had a component here that fires this event, calls an increment method, updates that, which updates that. And so all together, it doesn't work. Let's see what it's mad about. All right, debugging this. First thing I want to figure out, did it get this far? It did not get that far. Next, I want to look at the template. Is the template still mad at me? Template is not still. Oh, it's because I didn't invoke it. I did it. React style. There we go. Now it's working. Can hit that. Keeps track of it all. And that's how it works. Ask me some questions about event emitters.
If you hit refresh on it, does it start it over?
Yes, because that is the initial state. When you refresh a page, remember, HTTP is stateless. It doesn't keep track of like what something used to be. Every request is completely independent of every other request. So I do that. It doesn't know that I was just here. And so it goes with whatever the initial value is. Now, if you didn't want that to happen, what's the tool that we have for that?
Local storage.
Bingo. In that case, you'd actually initialize it the same way, like that. That's when you'd use something like ng on init, and you do something. They might actually have a different local storage abstraction because local storage is also kind of part of the DOM. But it would be something like on init if local storage dot get count, then get item count, then this dot count equals local storage dot get item count. String or null is not assignable type number. Oh, because I have to coerce it. And that is possibly null. No, it's not, because... Oh, because even if it finds it, it might still not be null. So that would be like that. No, because local storage isn't null. All right, I don't want to get sidetracked on that. But that's how you would do that.
Can you go to your app template?
Yeah.
So for inputs, we're using the square brackets. Outputs are parentheses.
Bingo! That means I'm passing something in. That means I'm listening for something. That's a property I'm binding to. That's an event I'm listening for. That's a property that I want to bind to. That's a method that I want to call whenever that event happens. More questions?
Can you show your counter display HTML page?
Más preguntas.
Can you go to your TypeScript page for the app counter? I'm trying to figure out why what I did isn't working. And I think it's because of that. Admin plug count, not number. Okay, yep.
More questions? Cool, your turn. So if you were following along, why didn't you listen to me? For everybody else, I'll pull the diagram back up. That's what we're doing. See if you can get it working on your own. Let's take 6 minutes. Go for it.
For the record, I was comparing it to my light one. I did your advice, and I
Gotcha.
had
All
it
right.
working for something else. I didn't
All
do this
right.
one.
Hey, Kyle, I just got booted off the call. Are we working on that ourselves now?
Yes, so your
Okay.
turn, replicate this.
Gotcha.
right, checking in. Give me a fist of 5. Fist is, I don't know what we were supposed to be doing. 5 is, I got it done. Okay. I see Sean. I see Chris. I see Scott. Lauren. Andy. Amp. Efren. Kurt. All right, so tell me what you need. Do you need more time or are you lost?
I know
Time.
what to do, and it makes sense, but I forgot what goes where, if that makes sense.
All right, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to build and burn this. So I'm going to do another one. You're going to do another one. So go ahead and start another Angular app right now, since that's going to take a sec, and I'll walk through all this again.
Mine increments by 2, and I'd love to know why.
Well, hopefully we can get to the bottom of that also. Oops. NPX, no. NPX at Angular CLI.
Do you think it's the terrorist internet, John, just messing with you?
I see 4 lights. Kyle, are you waiting for yours to do everything?
Oh, come on, man.
You haven't done all of your questions.
Yeah. I was like, why is that not going? Man, the edge of my watch strap like kind of caught on my shirt. It's a new shirt. It ripped out a thread. Pissing me off.
That's like Mr. Mom when he's wearing his favorite shirt and he gets shot. He was more upset about the hole in his favorite shirt. He's like, it's my favorite shirt.
Matt, that's a sick Mr. Mom reference. All right, so first thing I'm going to do is tell this thing to shut up. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to generate some components. So I'm going to make a display component. Oops, because I'm in the exact same file still. I'm going to make a display component. I'm going to make an increment component. Then, oops, still in the wrong folder. Then I'm going to go over to my app components TypeScript file. I'm going to initialize some state. So I'll say this has a count that initializes to 0. And then in the app component HTML file, I'm going to delete the boilerplate. I'm going to put my display and my increment. I'm going to pass my count into the app counter display. So it's one-way binding. The square brackets are what the property is going to be called on the component. What's in the quotes is what the name of the property is on me. And over in app counter display, let me get rid of some boilerplate. And say this is an input called count. It is required, and it's a number. Import input. Cool. So with just that, I should be able to verify that I have the half of the equation, state passing down. All right, and then back over in the browser, I refresh. Yep, those are there. And then in the counter display HTML file, actually use the count. And there it is. So that's half of it. Passing the state down. Now we need the event to come out of the increment component. So over at counter increment HTML, this turns into a button. And whenever it gets clicked, notice that's not a string. Then I want to call my increment function. And so it says, hey, you don't have an increment function. This is the counter increment component. Counter inc component TS. So I'm going to say this has an output of increment, which is a new event emitter. It does not use a constructor or a lifecycle hook. And it has an increment method. And all it does is take this dot increment and emit. Update my import. Oh, I can't have two things called increment. So this is going to be called handle click. I don't love that naming convention, but it's really common in SPA land. So I call that handle click. All that does is call this dot increment. Let's add that to the import also. All right. So now I need to listen for that increment event. Whenever this emits, it's going to say, hey, whenever the increment event fires on this, call the increment method of the app component. Set over the app component, make an increment method whose only job is this.count plus equals 1. And if I did all that correct, pew, 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 pew. Questions?
Can I see the HTML page on this app component?
Uses two components. It passes something into one of them. It listens for something on the other one. And it's not like you can pass as many things down and listen to as many things as you want. Like, for example, I could also pass the count into that one too. No reason I can't. And whenever that starts getting kind of long, I usually break it up. Hey, this was an exercise in Unit 1. And so it goes, hey, you didn't tell me I need a count. So then over in the app counter display, I can say, oh, by the way, or the app counter increment, and say, oh, and I also take an input. I will definitely be given it, and it is a number. Import input also. And then over here, I can do something like increment count to count plus 1. Increment 0 to 1. Increment 1 to 2. Magical. Questions?
Can you go back to your increment component file? If that's what the input. Is there a reason why on my handle click method, I have like the exact same syntax as you. This dot increment dot emit. It's given me a weird little error with emit where it's saying it expects at least one argument.
And it's an event emitter. Why don't you screen share and let's take a look.
Why is your event emitter coming from stream instead of Angular core?
Never mind. That's weird.
Okay, so what happened is you probably did like an auto fix thing.
Autofill. Yeah, I think that's what it was.
Mine did too. Mine did the same thing.
So yeah, there's more than one thing that has a class called event emitter, so you have to say where it comes from.
Okay, yeah, I think I just did that then. All right, thank you.
And you should use the like auto import kind of thing, but you'll run into this with Java also, where there's multiple packages that have the same class in them, so you have to make sure you get that right.
Emmett's got it over on the right-hand side. It'll specifically say, oh yeah, Angular core when you're autofilling, so just make sure you're pulling from what you want to.
Bingo.
Yeah, I think I remember seeing it say stream, and it just didn't click in my head that I haven't seen that, so why would I do that?
All right, other questions?
Kyle, can you show your app component HTML one more time? Sorry, I know you showed it twice already.
Don't apologize. I love it. Both of those want the count data, so data goes down. One of them also has an event, action goes up. A cool shorthand that I feel like a lot of people don't talk enough about, where the state lives is where the state should be updated. So like, that's there. That means that line should be there on the same component. That's required in Angular. It's required in Vue. There's more ways to do it in Angular. It's still the right way. If that's where the state is, anything that changes the state needs to live on this component. A logical extension of that is that if more than one like sibling needs a piece of state, that state needs to be in one of their parents. Because if I've got two siblings and this needs a piece of state and this needs the same piece of state, they can't talk to each other. You can't talk to your siblings. Data has to come from your parents because data only goes down. That means this is where the state lives. If that's where the state lives, that's where the state gets updated from. So if these things change the state, they don't change it directly. They pass an event up to here, and then this thing updates the state. Always, always.
Kyle, could we see where the increment existed again? All right, thank you.
State, thing that updates the state.
Awesome.
Passing the state down, passing the state down. Using the state that we got passed. Saying that we are expecting to be given state. Actually displaying the state. Listening for like a regular DOM event to happen. And then whenever that happens, we call handle click. That works basically just like add event listener does. Serves the same purpose. Handle click gets called and fires the emit event or the emit method of an event emitter. The name of the event that will fire whenever emit gets called is increment. So over here, we can listen for the increment event, and whenever increment fires on app counter increment, we can call our increment method, which changes the state. Goes in one big circle. State to there, gets passed in. This thing changes the state. Whenever that changes, this re-renders.
So the name increment has to match in both different components?
Not necessarily. So I think it's a sane way to do it. But let's say this is the only place I use the word increment. That needs to be increment because I'm on my app component, and like that's where that function's defined. This could be called fart. And so whenever the app counter increment component farts, so that's app counter increment. So I changed that one to fart. Old mature me. So I do all of that, and then it still works. Pretty cool.
So fart's just telling the app component something's happened over there, and
All
it's telling,
it does.
yeah. Okay, I got you.
Now, this is kind of interesting. You can also pass data this way. So let's say I go back to calling this increment, but instead I also pass some amount that I'm incrementing by into that. The way you get this through those like event listeners. Now that's called increment again. There's this special magic property called $event. That's going to have whatever you passed into the event emitter. So if I say that this is expecting an amount that's a number, I can increment it by the amount now. Now that's not mad at me anymore. That's not mad at me anymore. And let's go up by, oops. Let's go up by 2s. Hey, by 2s. So if we need to pass some data up also, that's how you would do that. Pass that in there. There's a magic variable called $event that you can pass in when you're calling your event listener. And then that's whatever you called the event with. Ask me some questions. I'm going to make you do this again. All right. Start fresh. Give it a shot. 6 minutes. 6 minutes on the clock. Go for it. All right, pencils down. Let's get a fist to 5. Fist is, I don't know what we were doing. 5 is, I got it working. Good, John. Thanks, Parnell. Thanks, Sean. Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Matt. Thanks, Scott. Thanks, Amp. Thanks, Lauren. Thanks, Andy. Thanks, Kurt. All right. Any other questions about how event emitting works? Cool. This is how we do add event listener with components. Components are custom HTML elements. HTML elements fire events, so do custom components. Syntax for it is just a little bit different. So I want to talk a little bit about observables. I don't think we're going to get very far with it on this go, but I want to introduce you to some ideas. So event emitters are synchronous. Always. We can't use these to handle asynchronous stuff. We're going to have some other way that we handle this. So in Angular, we do this with observables. Observables are a lot like promises. Solve the same kind of problem, but they are way cooler. And also, just fair warning, observables are kind of new to me. So I may have to be my own ombudsman and correct myself as we continue to learn more about observables together. But from what I've worked with so far on them, I'm mind blown. This is such a cooler way to handle async code than promises. So the general idea is that you have a thing called an observable, and then you have things called observers. An observer is something that subscribes to an observable. So this observable is made available in all of these observers through, for example, a service. And these all call subscribe on the observer. You know that expression, I would like to subscribe to your newsletter. That's what the observers are doing. They pull in the newsletter, that's the observable, and then they subscribe to it. So when they subscribe to that, subscribe takes a function as an argument that will get called with whatever the newest value of the observable is. So over here, every time this observable's, here, we can have something else that does it even. If this calls a next method with some value, that becomes the current value of the observable, the next value of it, and everybody who's subscribed to that observable gets the new value. At its core, that's basically it. There's some kind of cool tricks we can do with it, which is why I like them so much. But this is the overall architecture of observables. Observer subscribes to updates from an observable. The way that you tell an observable that it has a new value is you call its next method and pass that value in. This can handle async code. Strictly speaking, it can also handle synchronous code. But when we do things like HTTP requests, we don't do them with fetch. We do them with a thing called the HTTP service from Angular. And when you use the HTTP service, the thing that comes back is an observable. So if you want to use the response from a Pokemon API request, you subscribe to that HTTP request. And in that subscription handler, you get those things back. It'll get called with like your list of Pokemon or Pikachu or whatever. You update something in state, that reflects in your template, and so on.
That's not near enough information.
What else do you need?
I need to see that done, but I'll wait.
So like if you want to do a data transformation, would you do it in your subscribe or do you have to do it in a dot pipe?
Oh man, so you can do it in both. Here's the advantage of each. If you do a transformation on the response once, I'd probably just do it in the dot subscribe and move on with my life. If everybody who subscribes to this would want the same transformation, then it would make a lot more sense to do that here before it gets there. Because then you're doing the transformation once. Like, I guess it would kind of be more like all of these kind of come in through here. And then you're doing the transformation one time there. And then everybody else gets the result of that transformation. If you do it in the subscribe, all three of these need to do the transformation. That's slower. And like has repeated code and stuff. So you'd handle, like this is doing it with a pipe. This is just doing it once in the component. Both of them accomplish the exact same thing, but that's why you would choose one over the other. More questions about this so far?
It might be a step back, but in the case of it being the Poke API, or is the Poke API the observable or the observers?
The observable is
Yeah.
What would come back from making the HTTP request. So what it would look like is, whereas before we did fetch URL, the Angular way to do that is this.http.get URL. This evaluates to a promise, so you like .then and stuff off of it. This evaluates to an observable, so you .subscribe and stuff to it. Let's take a look at it in action. Also, this is the first time I've ever live coded one of these, so who knows what's going to happen. All right. I'm going to start by making a new one. So npx ng at Angular CLI. So let's see if we can get Pikachu to show up. Same thing as last time. Come on, Coverly. End of the day for everybody.
While that's loading, I have a comment. So like, what gets me kind of confused is that like with the fetch, you can like dot then and have a dot then chain, but like you can only subscribe once. So now I'm like, well, now what? So.
Sure. So like, you can subscribe once. What you do inside of that subscription handler, you can do as much as you want inside of that. Now, if you need to do a bunch more async things, well, like, I mean, for example, you could also, inside of that subscription handler, do another HTTP request. And then that would evaluate to an observable that you could set on a property, or like, I don't know, there's a lot of different ways you can handle that. With a lot of those, though, you probably are better off handling that all as like a pipe. Okay, so this was Pokemon Demo NG. Pokemon Demo NG. Pokemon Demo NG. All right. So I'm going to try to do this entire thing in one component, and hopefully that makes what's happening a little bit more obvious. So over in the app component HTML, I'm going to blow out all the boilerplate. Over in the app component TS, I'm going to blow out this. And actually, I'm going to add in ng init. No, on init. Yeah, there we go. And say that this implements on init. And then I'll make an ng on init method. And what this is going to do is this.http, which I need to get from somewhere. And HTTP comes from, oh man, I want to say HTTP client. And I want to say that's in Angular core, nope, Angular HTTP. All right, we're getting somewhere. All right, that's it. Is it that? No. That? Maybe? And then over here, this is a pattern we keep seeing. You import something, and you put it on the component. All right. Mad about this.
It's Angular/common/HTTP.
A common. Very nice. And that probably does need to get.
Or that's sorry, that's HTTP or HTTP client is in.
And is it almost? Come on, dude. And then I'm guessing this is like a new instance of HTTP client.
Yeah, you have to pass it in your constructor.
Yeah, and HTTP is an instance of HTTP client.
All right.
In the constructor, like Pernell said.
All right. Like so.
As a parameter of your constructor.
Oh, okay. It's injected. Oh, that's what makes sense. So this would be
private HTTP.
HTTP is an HTTP client. Beautiful.
Colon after HTTP.
Yeah, of course. All right, now everybody's happy. So this is a really interesting thing in Angular. We'll see it come up in Java also. This is called Dependency Injection, and it's magical. And about half of the JavaScript world fucking hates it, and this is why they won't use Angular, because it is very magical. If you declare something as a parameter of the constructor, and it has certain types, anything marked as injectable with the injectable decorator, then that like automatically puts that on this instance. That's why I can this.http, even though I didn't assign anything, I didn't really do anything but inject this into the class. It's weird. I wouldn't think too hard about how it works. It is voodoo. Okay, so over here, I'm going to go to pokeapi.co/api/v2/pokemon/Pikachu. I'm going to get Pikachu. And then I think I can directly subscribe to this. Yeah, I can do that. And I'm going to take the response, and how about I just look at it and see what I get back. All right, so this is served up over there. All right, something it doesn't like. No provider for HTTP client. Oh, I might need to put it in the... Actually, I almost definitely do. Put it over here in the module.
Yeah, you need the module as well.
Yeah. All right, so it's HTTP. Come on. What's the provider, John? Is it HTTP client?
HTTP client module from Angular common HTTP, and then it's HTTP client and imports.
Okay, so it's HTTP client module, like so.
Yes. And it's not provider, it's imports.
Oh. Ah, bingo. All right, how you like me now? Always be grateful for a syntax error. Those ones are easy. Not all of them are easy. That one is. Yes, it did. All right, who else is mad at me? All right, cool. Hey, look, I got a response. So let's say I want to keep track of just the URL. So over here I can say I want to declare a URL that is optional and it's a string. Then over in my template for this, I can say something like image source is, I'll call it image URL. Like so. I also only want to show this if that's set. And then over here, instead of just logging this, I can do this.image URL is response dot sprites dot Pokemon. Sprites dot front underscore default. Is it mad that I didn't type it? Yeah, thought I might do that. All right, so I think with this, I need to tell it what the type looks like. So I'm going to say there's a type called Pokemon response that is equal to, I only need to put the parts that I'm using. So it'll have a sprites, which will have a front default, which is a string. And I can say that this is a Pokemon response. All right, and it stops being a jerk about it. Delete that, and Pikachu! Not so very different from, like, promises. If I were going to split that up into some steps, I could say something like Pokemon request, which is an observable. And then in this ng and init, I could say this dot Pokemon request equals all of that. And then I could say this dot Pokemon request dot subscribe. Let's say that this is a Pokemon response type. Pokemon response. Oh. Wrap it. All right, now everybody should be happy-ish. And then this needs to know what comes back from it. Actually, I can probably move this up here. All right, and then I'll bet I don't need this type anymore. Yeah, cool. So, does it still work? Pikachu! So, that's an observable. This is an observer. The thing that we do with services is just putting this in another file. Why are you looking at me with milk all over your face?
I was having a snack.
All right, you want to say hi to my students? Here, I'll show them to you.
Hi.
All right, this is Miles.
Hi.
All right, we're not done talking about observables, but any more questions about how these work for right now? We make fetch requests with the HTTP module. You have to do a little bit of gymnastics to get into the app. But after that, it's actually quite a bit easier than fetch. This generic that we pass in, what kind of data comes back from this API. That gives us an observable. We can subscribe to observables. We get back whatever the most recent value of the observable is. Whenever that happens, we can do whatever we want with that. Those are our two like bread and butter ways to pass information up out of a hierarchy. Event emitters for synchronous stuff, observables for asynchronous stuff. Any last questions before you get served? Awesome. Hope this was helpful.